years ago, while the statute is made permanent for some of the most vulnerable subscribers. And in that process, H.R. 5140 helps bring local television into these communities. I want to thank a few of my colleagues for working with me to address concerns that this bill might be disruptive for certain subscribers. We will consider an amendment momentarily from the gentlelady from California, which seeks both to provide additional safeguards to ensure that subscribers do not lose access during the bill's transition period, and that the timing of the transition period is structured so that a satellite carrier who is not in compliance has adequate flexibility in meeting the bill's requirements. I thank the gentlelady for working in good faith with me and my staff to arrive at a transition provision that should work to the benefit of everyone. I also thank the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, the ranking member of the Committee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet, the chairman, I should say, of the Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet, who has been a strong advocate for consumers throughout this process and who likewise has been instrumental in shaping this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 5140. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as someone on this panel, and there's a few of us on here, if there's any issues that come up in the intellectual property sphere, and especially when it deals with whether from music to Case Act to Cloud Act to trade secrets to others, it comes through, and we have been very active in this for 7 years. This is the very thing that this year has bothered me the most. This bill had to come up because of the expiration, but we have waited now to just weeks before it's supposed to expire to draft a bill that we didn't even have a bill on before Monday, and now it comes up, and we have another amendment, and at a certain point in time, it's not that it's not going to get solved. It's not that it's not going to have something happen. It's not that stakeholders have been freaking out and calling our phones and blowing up our offices for the last 48 hours over this bill. It's also very interesting that some on this bill have one very different opinion of consent decrees in one hand and very different opinion on this bill in the other hand. I recognize that. But the interesting part here is, why didn't we have a markup on this in the sense of having a hearing on it? An overgeneralized copyright hearing was not what was needed here. And for 20, we said that we're giving a space to let this wind down. 20 years is long enough to wind down and somebody get to the negotiating table. Now we're just going to add 60 more days or so onto this process, and we're going to pass this along and hopefully finally come to a determination point on much of stuff that should have terminated a long time ago. I wish, I plead, I ask, let's get back to taking up bills and having hearings so that when we don't have to wait to a crammed-in week of markup in which we get a bill which everybody who wants to have an opinion on gives their opinion, and we end up writing an amendment the night before to come back to the committee to say this is how we're going to solve it. The industry sitting in the audience and not in the audience watching on their computers right now, hear me clearly. You know me well, I know you well. This is not the way we need to do this. Fix it. Quit arguing. We've done this before. And for my friends across the aisle, all I will say is a markup of this category should have had a hearing with it. It should have had something discussed about it and had the players in front of us to answer the questions of why they hadn't fixed it, why they hadn't negotiated it. But instead, we simply have a markup. Thus, the entire portrait of the Judiciary Committee for 2019. We only do it when we have to do it, and even then, it's rushed. With that, I yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. Are there any amendments to H.R. 5140 for what purposes the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5140, offered by Ms. Lofgren. Page 2, line 9, strike and.
Consent that the
Without objection, the amendment will be
considered
considered as read. The gentlelady is recognized.
This amendment does two things. First, it clarifies that a contract dispute or blackout won't prevent satellite TV providers from using the Section 119 license. In the bill as drafted, there's an ambiguity on the requirement for being able to use Section 119. As written, it could be interpreted as a requirement that a satellite company be currently providing local channels in all 210 markets to use the 119 license, and if it is not, regardless of the reason, including a contract dispute, then it can't use the license. This ambiguity could be used to extort satellite TV providers during retransmission negotiations. To clear up this ambiguity, my amendment makes it clear that failure to reach a retransmission agreement does not prevent the use of 119 license. The second part of this amendment deals with how long satellite TV providers have to comply with this new regime. Currently, the bill requires compliance in no later than 120 days. However, I do not feel that we have a strong enough committee record or sufficient evidence to support this timeline. So instead of 120 days, my amendment proposes giving satellite TV companies an initial window of 6 months to comply. Additionally, after the first 6 months, a satellite TV provider can avail itself of an essentially unlimited number of 90-day extensions, but only so long as it files a notice with the Copyright Office that it has acted reasonably and in good faith to provide local channels in all 210 markets, and will continue to make good faith efforts to accomplish this, intends to use the license despite not providing local channels in all markets, and provided a list of markets where it does not provide local channels, and provided a summary of actions taken to provide local channels to all markets. Now, I want to note that the Copyright Office doesn't actually make any determinations here, but instead makes the filing available for auditing and verification by interested parties. So the extension is essentially automatic, but there is actual accountability, because instead of verification of the satellite's providers' filings, by giving the broadcasters in the currently unserved market a civil right of action in district court to challenge the satellite company's assertions that is making reasonable efforts to provide services to all markets. Given the limited evidence we have as to how long it will actually take to comply with this new law, I'm inclined to be cautious so as not to cause unintended consequences. I actually think, and I'm glad to say this, I think this is the last time we will have this issue before the committee. I think that with this amendment, all parties will comply. And I remember in the 1990s, Rick Boucher, then a member of the committee, opining, when will we no longer have this before us? I didn't think it would take this long, but I think with the adoption of this amendment and this bill, we will have resolved this issue happily for the country and never see it again in the committee. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I recognize myself to speak on the amendment. I thank the gentlelady from California for offering her amendment. We all share the goal that subscribers to satellite television should not have their service disrupted, and also the goal of ensuring that all subscribers receive their local network broadcasts where such broadcasts are available. That's why I was pleased to work with Ms. Lofgren to build in additional safeguards to ensure that the transition period that H.R. 5140 creates is flexible enough to allow enough time for satellite carriers to meet the bill's requirement of providing local broadcast service in all markets if they do not do so already. With this amendment, after an initial grace period of 180 days instead of 120 days, satellite carriers will also have a mechanism for seeking an extension of time, provided they can demonstrate they are seeking to comply with this new requirement in good faith. There are also checks to ensure that the satellite carrier cannot rely on this extension process forever. There is an ability to challenge the sufficiency of the carrier's good faith efforts if and when a carrier seeks an extension. This creates a good balance between providing some flexibility in the time to comply with incentives to comply quickly in order to avoid any such challenges. Most importantly, this should ensure a smooth transition period so that no subscribers lose access to their satellite service, while also ensuring that subscribers also get their local broadcast stations as soon as possible in the cases where they currently do not. The amendment also makes a technical change in how to construe a statutory definition in order to ensure that minor interruptions in service because of payment disputes between broadcasters and satellite carriers do not imperil a carrier's ability to provide service more broadly. I urge my colleagues to vote for this amendment. Does anyone else seek recognition on the amendment?
I do.
The gentleman from Georgia.
Move to strike last word, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Again, I understand, and Chairwoman Lofgren and I, like I said, we discussed many things, but she actually laid it out completely very well in her statement and said, we don't have a committee record to actually make recommendations. This is the problem we have here. Because we have nobody sitting in front of this committee who sat there from the satellite companies, from the other components, from broadcasters and everybody else, to sit here and talk about how this has lasted so long, why it's lasted so long. Of us who actually follow this know why it's lasted so long, but let's put this out in a record we don't have a committee record of in this Congress. And I think this is the concern, you know, for many of us, that we just finally just get to where you just throw up your hands and know that long-term legislation. I wish I shared the gentlelady's optimism that we would never see this again. I don't, because there's a lot of still left out issues here that will continue on that could have been discussed in a hearing that we didn't have, and now we're having to do it in markup. I'm still concerned about the extension of time. I'm still concerned about what could happen and the rubber stamp from the Copyright Office, the broadcasters being able to sue. I mean, there's a lot of extra issues out here when it comes to satellite transmission, broadcast transmission, for those of us who've dealt with it from, you know, not just this issue, from Orphan County issues into everywhere else, which I wish that some would stop challenging Orphan County issues as they have. But this is the kind of thing that needed to have been discussed. So if this is the best we can do, this is the best we can do. I think at a certain point in time, I'll go back to the gentleman from, you know, almost 20 years ago. Let it end. Let it end. Just like consent decrees on the other side. The only reason that I'm supporting of this at this second is I also at times, after we have messed it up for so long in Congress, you don't need to just sometimes have a hard break. So the only reason I'm saying this, because I say it about consent decrees, I'm consistent. Consent decrees don't just need to go away. There needs to be a pathway out of, and this probably needs a short pathway out. Although the pathway for this should have been solved a long time ago, and there's been sides that just simply did not want to negotiate. We never had the chance to sit them again down here and say, let's fix this, or you're not going to get a chance. I'm tired of my staff's time having to deal with an issue in which we didn't even know what was actually going to happen until last minute. I want to see this done. This is the only reason I'm supporting this. I think this could have been handled in many different ways, but that's why we have Republicans and Democrats, majorities and minorities. But this one is an area that is sad, because this committee is the most bipartisan committee when it comes to intellectual property when we put our minds to it. The problem with this one, we just didn't put our minds to it. So with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back for what purposes? The gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment, and I'd like to thank you and also Representative Lofgren for your hard work on this legislation, and I appreciate your willingness to engage in dialogue with me throughout this process. This has been a process of elephants fighting, and when elephants fight, the grass takes a beating. And in this situation, the grass are the consumers. At all times, I have been concerned about the 870,000 Americans who will receive their signal through distant signal licensing. This compromise amendment ensures that satellite TV providers have time to change to a Section 122 license by giving an initial 6 months and then an unlimited number of 90-day good faith extensions. This ensures that those hundreds of thousands of Americans, including as many as 27,000 Georgians, who, by the way, don't live in my district, which is in metropolitan Atlanta. They live in rural Georgia, those 27,000 Georgians. And we're ensuring with this amendment that they won't ever have a moment where they turn on their television set only to see a blank screen. This amendment is a responsible way to phase out the Section 119 license. 120 days is too brief to ensure that no consumers are left in the dark, the victims of ideological battles in Washington. I intend to vote in favor of this amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to do so. And with that, I will yield back.
The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the work that's been done on this. We've gotten so much conflicting in the way of views from different people, different entities, and of course, I guess sometimes personal life bleeds over. I've grown suspicious of DirecTV and AT&T and some of the things they've said. We don't have DirecTV. We dropped it this year, but it really, it's not the opening statements that can sometimes be monotone, but it's the fact that when we have a legislative hearing, people come in, but it gives a reason for us to do more research and to look into all these things before the hearing ever starts. And for everybody on both sides of the aisle that I'm aware of, I mean, our lives are so jammed up. There are so many issues we deal with day in, day out. By having a legislative hearing, it brings it into focus a particular issue, particular legislation that may need work, and it's so much easier to get language right if we get widespread input before we actually draft the language and said, here it is. It's not great, but it's better than it could have been. That's really no way to do legislation. But my local folks are in favor reluctantly of this. So I'll be voting for it, but
Well, gentleman, you.
yes, I certainly will.
I think gentleman, I need to make a clarification on something. I am for the underlying bill. I am not in favor of this amendment. There is no way I can go along with 90-day continuous extensions, and then force an organization to have to go to district courts to top it. So I'm in favor of the underlying bill. I'm not in favor of this amendment. I need to make that clarification.
Yep, certainly, and I appreciate that clarification. So I hope this will be the end of this type of approach, just running in because the issue's been around for 20 years. We're just going to pass something and hope we never deal with it again. But when you don't have more time in the full committee on such an issue, then it pretty well assures it's coming back. It will be back. And I would be willing to bet that's exactly what's going to happen. There will be more issues come back we're going to have to deal with. And when that happens, I hope if we're still in the minority, the current majority will give us a full hearing with lots of witnesses so that we can all get the best input from different sources. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any further amendments to H.R. 5140?
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5140, offered by Mr. Deutsch of Florida. Add at the end of the bill the following.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to waive the reading.
Without objection. The bill will be, without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, the bill before us today, H.R. 5140, is focused on whether satellite TV carriers should have to negotiate market rates for broadcast TV content when they want to retransmit on their platforms. Many of the members of this committee believe that TV broadcasters deserve the right to negotiate rates for the use of their content. My amendment applies that same basic belief that American creators deserve the right to control and get fair market value for the use of their work that they own. TV broadcasters have told Congress that, and I quote, "The time has come to stop subsidizing billion-dollar satellite TV companies," close quote, with the Section 119 compulsory license. I believe the time has also come to stop subsidizing AM/FM radio broadcasters as well. For too long, AM/FM radio has retained the right to play songs without paying the performers, though they do pay the songwriters. In contrast, other platforms have evolved into the 21st century. Both satellite radio and digital musical services are required to pay both performers and songwriters. Mr. Chairman, FM radio is the largest music service in the world, hands down, 200+ million listeners. $17 billion in annual revenue, most of which is generated by advertising sold against an audience drawn to those stations by music. For the last decade, we learned that denying performers their rights on AM/FM radio discourages small and medium-sized radio stations from making the leap to digital platforms, and it leads to further consolidation in radio. This consolidation leads to consolidated playlists and less diverse music market on radio. Last year, when we passed the Music Modernization Act, we equalized the rate standards used to set royalties for digital music platforms. Because of the MMA, the standard across the board is fair market value. Mr. Chairman, fixing this issue of AM/FM performance is the unfinished business of the MMA. America stands almost alone in the entire world in not giving recording artists a performance right for broadcast radio airplay. Nearly every country in the world collects royalties from radio broadcasters for the use of sound recordings. In fact, every industrialized country except the United States has a performance right. American artists and copyright owners lose close to $200 million every year in royalties that they have rightly earned for their work. They can't collect these royalties because we don't have a reciprocal performance right here in the United States. That's taxable income that would be coming into the United States if American radio broadcasters were held simply to the same standard as every other music service in America and actually paid for the product that is the lifeblood of their business. Music creators deserve the same right to retransmission consent as TV content creators. And while I understand that the performance right is a different statutory license than the statutory license being amended by H.R. 5140, the time to fix this has come. Now, I know, Mr. Chairman, that you and the ranking member are both champions for music, and I hope that you can commit to moving a performance rights bill through this committee, this Congress. And that's why I'll withdraw this amendment today, but I hope that this committee can come together in a bipartisan way to correct this injustice for music creators that has continued for far too long. I yield back.
Gentleman yield.
I will yield.
Thank you. You and I see this very similar. And I think last year, one of the great things that came out of the multi-year discussions on MMA was the discussion of getting both players in the room. And I see some of the players in the room as well to discuss this. My hope is, I'm not sure where, because we've had massively other things going on in this committee, I would hope those discussions are still going on. I would hope that we would actually take this to my gentleman from Florida. We bring this to the committee, get an update on where this is at. Because at the end of the day, you and I both know that this was that large piece that needs to be addressed, but also has probably one of the more dramatic stories to be told, or horror stories, if you would, to be told on the dramatic effect of this. So it needs to be actually discussed, but I think there's a solution. I agree with you on this, and I appreciate you at least bringing it up. This is definitely not the place to do it here, but I do appreciate we coming up, because I think it does highlight a contradiction today as we go forward, and I appreciate it. I yield back.
I yield back the balance of my time.
I'll recognize myself. It is the place to bring it up here, but not on this bill.
That will be called non-germane.
Yes.
Thank you.
But not on this bill. I thank the gentleman from Florida for offering his amendment. As most people know, I have long believed that all services and platforms that play music should be subject to the same rules. There is no reason that broadcast radio shouldn't pay royalties to artists, just like satellite radio and internet radio. The artists whose music is played should be paid fairly by broadcast radio, just as they are by all the other platforms. The change is long overdue. I'm hopeful that I can work together with the gentleman from Florida, with the ranking member, and with others on the committee to fix this long-standing problem in this Congress. In fact, I plan to reintroduce a bill on this issue in the near future. I thank the gentleman again for offering and withdrawing the amendment. Reporting quorum being present. The question is on the motion to report the bill H.R. 5140 as amended favorably to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. This concludes our business for today. Thanks to all of our members for attending and for attending the follow-up to our meeting yesterday. Without objection, the markup is adjourned.